Well, hello Confirmands. It is good to see you. Thank you for joining me for this video. This is Year 1, Lesson 4, the Tower of Babel. So it's just a little story. We're going to have the opportunity to read it together, to think about it together, and then we are going to do some review of the 6 stories that we have covered thus far. So that's where we're going. Before we do the lesson, though, the first word in this week's phrase that pays is Abba. Abba, A-B-B-A, Abba. All right? So here's the story from Genesis 11. Now, the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the mortals had built. And the Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they all have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. All right, that's the lesson. So, again, it's just a little simple story. Lots for us to think about. Let's start with some vocab. Let's start with some ideas that you need so that we can figure out what this story is about. First, they settled on a plain in the land of Shinar. We know where that is, right? That is in the region of Mesopotamia and Babylon. It's now part of Iraq. Right, so the city in question, the joke, you know, Babel, that is the name of the city, and when you babble, you're incoherent in your speech. You know, someone will be talking and you don't have any idea what they're saying. They stop babbling, right? So that joke works in English and it works in Hebrew, which is kind of rare for a joke to work in both languages. And the city that they're talking about, that they're building, the city and the tower, might have been abandoned for a time, but very quickly it becomes Babylon. And that was one of the great cities of the ancient world and site of some of the wonders of the ancient world, like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So that's where we are. We're somewhere in Iraq. We're in a place that becomes the city of Babylon. The bricks that they're talking about, these are mud bricks, mud mixed with chopped straw and then baked in a kiln. And you wouldn't think that such things would be very, very strong, but in fact they're very strong. And that, you know, there are a bunch of nerd engineers out there who've tried to calculate how big a tower you could make with these mud bricks. And the answer is huge. You could do a huge tower before the bricks on the bottom begin to compress under the weight of the tower. You know, if you built it right with proper architectural rules and proper weight distribution. You know, I saw one engineering estimate that the tower could be over a mile high before the bricks on the bottom started to fail. I'm not saying that the tower was a mile high. I'm just saying that the bricks, you know, don't get all snooty that the bricks wouldn't be able to hold up a very big tower because they're just made of mud and straw. In fact, they're shockingly strong. All right? Which brings us to the second word in this week's phrase that pays, voyage. Voyage, V-O-Y-A-G-E, voyage. All right, third thing you need to understand, this bitumen, this is a sticky, dense, thick, goopy kind of oil or petroleum. And it is found, it can be refined, I mean we can make it now, but it can be found naturally occurring in oil sands or in lakes, in pitch lakes. And so they were going to bind the bricks together with this thick, gloopy, sloppy, oily goo. Right now, bitumen is used as a component of asphalt. You know, when you blacktop a road. And if you have questions about that, I suggest you talk to Mr. Loken, because he's forgotten more about asphalt than I will ever know in my life. But they had these mud bricks, and they used naturally occurring bitumen as the mortar to hold them together. Right? We take a look at the lesson. You know, we're fond of calling this the story of the Tower of Babel, but the lesson never talks just about the tower. It's always the tower and the city. And so there are ancient guesses from writers and historians in ancient times about how big the tower was, but they are all over the map. Right? They're everywhere from 300 feet, you know, the length of a football field, to miles high. And so, you know, the bottom line is that there are no surviving records about the tower. We don't have a surviving foundation. We don't have surviving ruins. We have no idea how big this tower was, or anything about it. We have no idea how far they got in building their city or their tower, how big it was all supposed to be. Again, sometime not so long after this, it becomes Babylon, and Babylon was a big place, big, happening, well-developed place. All right? Now, some words that and some ideas that seem difficult, but you're fine. There's a study called etiology, right? And this is the story of how stuff starts, how stuff begins, right? That if you're trying to figure out the beginning of something, you're doing etiology. And an etiological story, obviously, is a story that tells us about how something started or how something began, right? So we've been wading through etiological stories so far in confirmation this year. All 6 of the stories we've looked at, you know, are etiological. How did the world come to be? How did men and women come to be? And how did they find each other? How did they pair off? You know, how did sin and brokenness enter the world? How did violence enter the world, especially family violence? How did that enter the world? You know, the flood, you know, how was it that people were preserved during a natural disaster that we all remember? And now the Tower of Babel. How is it that people speak different languages and that people spread out? Why is that? So these are all etiological stories. And this in particular is an etiological story about where different languages came from. But we're not talking yet about the story itself. We're just describing what kind of story it is. And if you want to sound really smart, you know, you just drop etiological somewhere at school, you know, and you have half a sense of what it means. You know, people are going to get out of your way and start, you know, buying treats for you, because they'll figure out that you're the smartest one there is. All right. There's also a scientific study called linguistics. This is the study of languages, right? It is very complicated. It is very diverse. It has all kinds of subfields, but it's a study of everything having to do with speech. And so obviously, this is a story. It's an etiological story about matters of linguistics. Which brings us to something that you probably don't know because you've never had to think about it, but languages are related. Languages come in families. And you know that for example, Swedish and Norwegian are brother and sister languages. People who speak one can speak the other. You know, Spanish and Portuguese aren't that far off. That you know that there's a commonality to some languages, but that commonality doesn't exist to other languages. Because you know German and English doesn't mean you have a prayer of understanding Japanese or Korean, different language families. You know, just because you speak French doesn't mean you have a prayer at the languages of sub-Saharan Africa. That languages are in families, and that these families trace their line back to one common ancestor language, right? So English, for example, our language, is part of the Germanic family of languages. And the Germanic family of languages is part of the Indo-European family of languages. And there are a lot of Indo-European languages. 448 is the count that I found. So there's 448 related languages, all from the same family. Now, that may seem, you may think to yourself, there's not 448 languages in the world. Oh yeah, depending on who's doing the counting, there's somewhere between 7,100 languages and 8,400 languages, plus an unbelievable number of extinct languages, or languages that we only have a fragment of. And there's a whole study, a whole scientific endeavor to group these languages into families that make sense because they came from a common family. And so, this story of the Tower of Babel, it is an etiological story about the origin of a language family. That these people all spoke one language, and then now they speak different languages that over time have become incomprehensible to each other, but all trace themselves back to one language. That happens, right? But again, this is a language family that we're talking about, not all of the language families. The third word in this week's phrase that pays is drops. Drops, D-R-O-P-S, drops. So now the last thing that we need to make sure you understand. Remember our old friend Eretz from the story of the Great Flood? Right? Eretz is the Hebrew word that can be translated as earth or land or ground or country or field. It can be everything. It can be everything around here. It can be everything that I know about. It can be, my community. It can be my county, my field, Eretz, right? So that's the word that's used here, right? And so the claim is that everybody in the Eretz spoke this one language. Everybody in the Eretz wanted to hang together. But God scrambled the language for all the people in the Eretz and spread them out over the whole Eretz. Now, that matters. Now suddenly there's no problem. We don't have to say that this language that was spoken in Babel is the root language of the African languages and the Asian languages and the Indo-European languages and the Oceanic languages. We don't have to say that because of Eretz, right? That of this area, of this place, however big that area is, there was one language that was then divided into other languages. There's one more thing that I want you to know. This is not the only story in the Bible about the beginning of languages. This is not the only etymological story about the development of other languages. In the chapter right before this one, Genesis 10, where we're talking about Noah and his sons when they get out of the ark, right? When the Bible lists the descendants of each of Noah's children, there's a spot in Genesis 10 where the Bible says that Noah's descendants spread out, here's the quote, in their lands with their own language, by their families, in their nations. So there's already a thing there that other languages are developing in other places. So between our old friend Eretz, and you probably should go back through the story. It's only 11 verses, and read it, and everywhere that earth is, you should put Eretz, just so that you stay clear that we're talking about an area of indeterminate size. We don't know how big this area is, and there is nothing in the story that demands that it be global, right? We don't know. If we care about the Bible, we should actually care about the words. And the word there is not global, right? Nobody in the ancient world knew that the earth was a globe. It's Eretz. So read the thing, plugging in Eretz everywhere earth is, and then you'll have it in your head, right? So between Eretz and Genesis 10, we have great freedom to receive this story in lots of different ways. That it doesn't have to be a literal history of the development of all human languages. That's not a necessary reading. We're not stuck with that. It's a story about a specific people in a specific place. We don't know how big that place is, who made plans that God didn't appreciate, and so God scrambled their language and spread them out, right? It's not a historical account of where all the languages in the world come from. You know, the Click language that the Bushmen speak down in South Africa, you know, the Aboriginal languages in Australia, you know, the languages in Northern Europe, the languages in Asia. It doesn't explain all of that. It's what happened in an eretz, to a specific group of people, right? You understand that. So it's a story about a group of people who decide to build a city and a tower to make a name for themselves and to keep their community together. It says that right in the lesson. That's what they're doing. You know, we don't want to get spread out, right? We'd like to make a name for ourselves. We'd like other people, again, other people in other places to make a name for ourselves. That means other people in other places. We'd like them to notice us and respect us. So we're going to build this city and this tower that reaches up to the heavens. And up to the heavens, you know, that's an indeterminate height, right? Does a radio tower reach up into the heavens? Yeah, I think it does. Does an airplane go up into the heavens? Yeah, it does. How about a 10-story building? Yeah, it kind of does. You know, so we don't know how tall this tower is, and there's no need for you to imagine a tower that's miles high in order to respect this story. Right, so they don't want to be scattered over the whole eretz. They want to be respected, so they build this tower, and God is not amused by their plans. Right, God doesn't think it's cool. So in order to stop their project and to stop them from doing other similar projects, God mixes up their language. They can't communicate with one another. That's very frustrating, and they drift away from one another. That they're scattered over the whole eretz, however big eretz is. Are they 20 miles from each other? Are they 10 miles from each other? Are they 100 miles from? We have no idea, right? So the big question, of course, is why was God unhappy with this project? Why didn't God want this project and similar projects to continue? Before we answer that question, though, we should give another couple of words in the phrase that pays. November 5th. November 5th. All right? So throughout history, our Jewish neighbors and our Christian ancestors have wrestled with this story. I mean, what's the problem? What's it about? What's it supposed to teach us? Right? And again, you know, the literalists, they think the whole thing is that you just have to swallow that they built a tower, you know, up to the dome of the sky. Eretz, 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 eretz. You know, they want you to say that this is where every language in the world came from. Eretz, Genesis 10. Let's build a name for ourselves, right? I mean, you're clear on this. This is a story about a specific thing, and let's get clear about what it is we're supposed to learn. So some ideas about what the story means are listed for you in your lecture notes, right? Some people have said that the problem of this community was pride, that they thought that they could build their own way into heaven, that they didn't need God anymore to get into heaven. This is, you know, that old idea that heaven is, you know, a physical place that exists above the dome of the sky. I mean, we think heaven is a place too. Heaven is wherever God is. There's a place where God where God resides, right? Where God exists in God's glory, and that God will restore all creation, you know, for us when we pass. But and at the end of all things. But you know, we don't think that there's a place sitting on the dome of the sky. But one idea is that the people in Babel actually did believe that, and they weren't going to wait for God to rescue them or to make them good or to heal them. They were just going to build a tower and let themselves into heaven, and that God couldn't have that. That they thought that they could undo the fall, and they could be like God again, and they didn't need God's help. And so God said, no, that ain't going to fly. Maybe. A second idea is also related to pride. That the people thought that they were in charge of where they lived and how they lived, that God had nothing to say about it. If God has a different plan, that doesn't matter to us. We want to live here. We want to make a name for ourselves. We don't want to be scattered. We're in charge of what happens with our lives. And that was the problem that God saw, and that's the reason that God mixed them up and scattered them. Maybe. Another group of people over time have thought that the problem was a lack of faith. Remember, after the flood, God put the rainbow in the sky and made it a sign between him, a sign of covenant between him and the people, that he would never destroy the world again by a flood, and that they could look at the rainbow whenever they saw it, and they would know that God had made this promise and God would keep that promise. But maybe these people wanted their own security, that they didn't trust that God would keep his promise. They wanted a really tall tower, so if the floods came again, they could just climb their tower and ride it out on the top of their nice tower. So that it's a lack of faith, it's a lack of trust in God. Right? I mean, whether they get it done or not is immaterial, right? That this is about their hearts, that we're not going to trust God not to do this again. We're going to take this into our own hands. Maybe. A fourth possibility is that God said, you know, they can do anything now, right? The reason we got to mix them up is now they'll think they can do anything. Is that maybe God thought that repeated accomplishments would teach humanity the wrong lesson, that God wasn't so concerned about the tower, but God didn't want us thinking that we could do anything we wanted to do, no matter what, at any time. That God is working a plan to redeem the world, and if we got over arrogant, it would just make it harder for God to work God's plan. So maybe. Which one is it? I don't know. Is it any of those? I don't know. Is it some combination of those? I don't know. We have this very strange, very cool little story that for a certain group of people who wanted to do what they wanted to do and to build something that would be the thing that held them together, God said no. And so now we get to think and puzzle and wonder about what was going on and how that applies to us. So I'm interested in what you think, which brings us to our homework, of course, right? On the homework, your name. It's so important that you put your name. Please put your name. Then the phrase that pays, right? Then I'm asking you, what do you think the main lesson is for this story of the Tower of Babel? What do you think the purpose of this is? Why is it in the Bible? What are we supposed to learn? And then because this is such a short little story, I list the other 6 stories that we've talked about. I know that there are questions that you have, because I've looked at your things that you've turned in. I know that you have questions that we haven't answered or that you're not clear about, you know, that I've tried to answer, but I haven't done such a good job, that you're not clear about each of those stories. So this is an opportunity for you to cycle back. And a lot of our conversation time on Wednesday is going to be picking up your old questions about these old stories. So these are all the etymological stories. These are stories about how things started, how things began. We are going to turn a sharp corner next week, and we're going to move out of etymological stories, and we're going to move into historical stories about the founders of Israel, about the Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and the whole group of people who founded Israel. So Genesis 1 through 11 is its own bucket of stories, its own kind of stories. And we are now at that stopping point. So we're going to look back a little bit. I want you to give me one question that you still have for each of those stories, and they're listed there. All right? It's going to be good. I am very grateful that you continue to watch these videos. I'm very grateful for your participation on Wednesdays. It was much better this last Wednesday. You know, we pushed back, needing the revolving drum of apathetic shame, you know, where we have to pull little names out to make people ask questions. I would be delighted if we could just even spike that whole idea, and that when you get together on Wednesday, you're there to play, I'm there to play. We're all trying to learn, we're all trying to live in the truth, and we're all trying to follow Jesus better. All All right? I will see you on Wednesday. Online kids, 8 o'clock. In-person kids, 7 o'clock. You take care of yourselves. I hope you have a great Halloween. I'm looking forward to seeing you. Bye.